All right. So, starting with the pathology of type 1 diabetes. So, if we understand along a natural course of type 1 diabetes, we will understand that it is a role of the three factors. So, the three factors here are first is it could be because of some genetic predisposition. So number one factor is genetic predisposition. So the genetic predisposition is the increased risk if there is a HLA, DR3 and DR4. This expression increases the risk of type 1 diabetes. Increases the risk of type 1 diabetes. Number one. So remember, it is a genetic predisposition. Genetic predisposition. And number two is the immunity, that is immunological markers. Some immune factors play a role, and important immune factors which play a role are antibody against islet cells, antibodies against the islet cells. So these antibody which are against the islet cells, most important antibody is the GAD antibody. GAD antibody. So now the full form of GAD is this is an enzyme which is found in the brain or nerves also. So this is the glutamic acid decarboxylase. This GAD is in the beta cells also. It is in the beta cells also. So antibody against GAD. Other antibody is islet cell autoantigen (512). So short form is ICA. Islet cell antibody. So this will be, yes, glutamic acid decarboxylase and antibody against the ICA 512, and also antibody against zinc transporter. So there will be antibody against zinc transporter 8. Zinc transporter. Now the third pathogenesis is the environmental factors. Environmental factors. So environmental factors can be some infections which are thought to trigger this autoimmunity. These are the viral infections, and important viral infection is Coxsackie virus, rubella, enterovirus. So this is the environmental factor. Remember, this is islet cell autoantigen, means against that antibody will be developed. ICA, A stands for the antigen. Now these are the viral factors, and it is also have a risk that if a child drink the cow's milk, bovine milk, then it can also trigger it. So bovine milk, it can trigger the autoimmunity. So these are the important environmental factor. Zinc transporter 8. The number of the zinc transporter is zinc transporter 8. So these are the factors involved in the pathogenesis of the type 1 diabetes. They are involved in the pathogenesis of type 1 diabetes. Now let's see how the patient will progress. How the patient will progress and the stages of type 1 diabetes. Stages. So this is y-axis. This is a y-axis. How bovine milk trigger by autoimmunity, by the autoimmunity. GAD is a most common antibody. Yes, it will be a most common antibody. Now coming to the natural course of the patient disease. Natural course is the y-axis is beta cell mass. This is a beta cell mass, and this is time in years. Time period in years. So the beta cell mass, it is say 0% here, and here it is 100%. 100%, and this is the time period in years. Time period in years, and remember, for each individual, for each child, the time period will be different. It can be detected in the first decade of life, it can be detected in the second decade of life. It is all variable time interval. So what happens, the child is born with a genetic predisposition. So this is a beta cell mass. There is genetic predisposition. Like a presence of HLA markers, and then there is some immune trigger here. There is a immune trigger. Here. So this immune trigger, this will be causing the depletion of beta cells like this. Beta cell like this. Now this is the cutoff, and we take the cutoff as 20%. We take the cutoff of beta cell mass to be 20%, below which the diabetes will occur. So this is the cutoff, usual cutoff. Here. So as the immune damage of the beta cells is occurring, the beta cells are destroyed. They are destroyed, and once it reaches the 20% limit, here the diabetes will be manifested. As soon as it touches 20%, beta cell mass touches the 20%, the diabetes will occur beyond this line. So this is a phase of overt diabetes. This is a phase of the overt diabetes. Now let's see what are the stages of the type 1 diabetes. The stages of type 1 diabetes. So the first stage is, this is the first stage. Let's see. Stage 1. So I will write it here, stage 1. The features of the stage 1, if we look at the antibodies level, plasma glucose, the symptoms of patient. So as you can see, the stage 1 is the stage where immune trigger has started. Stage 1 is the stage where immune trigger has started. So antibody are present, plasma glucose will be normal, symptoms will be absent. That is a stage 1. Look at the diagram. Correlate with the table. So in the stage 1, the immunological markers will be positive. While in stage 2, this is the stage 2. So in the stage 2, there will be the presence of antibody, now plasma glucose will be in a pre-diabetes range. Symptoms will not yet occur. So pre-diabetes, plasma glucose, and symptoms will be absent. While the stage 3, this will be all stage 3. So in the stage 3, antibody will be there, plasma glucose will be in a diabetes range. This we call it as overt diabetes. So this is known as the overt manifested diabetes, and symptoms will be positive. So these are the 3 stages of type 1 diabetes according to the natural progression of the disease. Yes, symptoms will occur after 20% is left. 80% is destroyed, beta cell mass 80% is destroyed, then the frank diabetes or overt diabetes occur. Now what happens, there is a very interesting phenomena which occur here, and that phenomena is during this decline of beta cell mass. When there is a decline of beta cell mass, insulin deficiency is happening. But if there is some acute infection, suppose a patient develops a urinary tract infection, pneumonia, any infection will trigger, suddenly the blood sugar level will shoot up. Because of stress, insulin will be decreased. So what happens during this phase, that if there is a sudden infection, the insulin level will drop drastically. So if acute infection before stage 3, just before stage 3, so what will happen, because of the stress, there will be a decreased insulin action. What does the green line represent? Remember, the green line represents the time after which patient develops the clinical definition of diabetes. After that, patient will develop the overt diabetes. Now, insulin action will reduce, and patient develops diabetes manifestation. Needing insulin. But when infection is controlled, suddenly there will be a decreased requirement of insulin. Because the stress is removed. So the patient will have for a few maybe weeks or months, there will be almost nil requirement of the insulin, and this phase is known as why insulin requirement is reduced, because infection get control, stress levels are reduced, there was a decreased insulin action. So this phase is known as the honeymoon phase in type 1 diabetes. Yes, that by definition you can call it as latent diabetes, that patients blood sugar increase during the infections, and when you control the infection, the insulin requirement will go down because the stress has gone. Why insulin is required more in stress? Because in the stress there are catecholamines are released, steroids are released, so they are anti-insulin hormones, so the blood sugar level increases. So the honeymoon phase in type 1 diabetes, if I can summarize, is the phase, it is reserved for, this terminology is reserved for type 1 diabetes, when the insulin requirement is reduced or almost zero requirement of the insulin is there. Then this phase is known as the honeymoon phase, stage or period of type 1 diabetes. Yes, before the stage 1 the period of honeymoon phase can be there. Now coming to, so this was the pathophysiology of the type 1 diabetes and the natural course of type 1 diabetes. Now come to the pathology of type 2 diabetes. Pathology of type 2 diabetes. So in the type 2 diabetes, it is multiple factors, with the most common risk being obesity, most common environmental cause. So the pathology of type 2 diabetes, the most common environmental risk is obesity. It is the obesity. So what is latent type 1 diabetes? There is no term like latent type 1 diabetes. These are the stages: stage 1, stage 2, stage 3 of the diabetes. Genetic etiology of type 1 diabetes. Genetic etiology is HLA-DR3 and HLA-DR4. These are the markers. These are the genetic predispositions. Now coming to the pathology of type 2 diabetes, the most common environmental risk factor is the obesity, especially the visceral obesity or the truncal obesity. Central obesity, visceral fat. So let's see how it leads to the type 2 diabetes. So when there is a lot of adipose in the body, so there is increase adipose cells in the body. So what they will release, these adipose cells will release adipokines. Now what are adipokine? Adipokine are nothing but adipose plus cytokine. So there is the release of these adipokines from the fat cells of the body, especially the truncal fat. truncal fat, they synthesize, they release these adipokines, and they are similar to other cytokines that they mediate the inflammation in the body. They will mediate the inflammation in the body. So increase adipose cells in the body releases the more and more of adipokines, and these adipokines also stimulate other cytokines, like it stimulate the release of interleukin 1, interleukin 1, but a low grade. This is a low grade inflammation. Remember, this is the terminology, pathological terminology used in type 2 diabetes. Low grade inflammation is there. How obesity is a environmental risk factor? Obesity is a environmental risk factor. What is the environmental risk factor which you can prevent? Obesity you can prevent. One other is the genetic you can't prevent. So the most common is obesity. There is increased adipokines released, and there is a stimulation of the interleukin 1. So what happens? From the adipose tissue, there is also release of free fatty acids. Free fatty acids from the adipose tissues. So what will happen? Remember this important point and correlate with other clinical scenario, and that other clinical scenario I will give you. Listen carefully. Suppose a child, the growing age child is coming to you with some chronic inflammation or chronic infection. Some of you must have seen, when a child got a chronic infection or chronic inflammation, the growth of the child is retarded. The growth of the child is retarded. Why it happens? Also, in adult patient, when there is a chronic infection, chronic inflammation, infertility occur in the adult patients. In the child, growth retardation occur. So why these are happening? These are happening because of interleukins or cytokines. Remember, they have a very important property. They cause hormonal resistance. Whether that hormone is a growth hormone, whether that hormone is a testosterone or estrogen, they cause the resistance at the level of post receptor signal. So interleukin 1, it will inhibit the insulin action at post receptor level. Insulin action at post receptor signaling, that is affected, post receptor signaling. So there is, yes, other markers will also be there, like interleukin 6 will be there, TNF alpha will be there. Yes, TNF alpha will also be there, but the predominantly it is a interleukin 1 which plays a role here. Insulin action is inhibited post receptor signaling. So this is more than, yes, I will complete it. TNF alpha, interleukin 6, they are also there. There is remember, whenever there is a chronic inflammation, it leads to hormone resistance in general. So whenever there is a inflammation, there is hormone resistance. Hormone resistance. You can take any example of the inflammation causing the ineffective hormonal action. So when there is a post receptor signaling action is inhibited, this leads to insulin resistance. So this is the first pathogenesis. So this will lead to insulin resistance. So what will happen when there is a insulin resistance? Beta cells will produce more insulin. It will produce more insulin. Remember, whenever there is a hormone resistance, its organ will start producing more hormone. Will it start producing more hormone? So initially there is a paradox that there is a insulin resistance, but beta cells are working hard. They are trying to compensate. They are producing more insulin, but up to a level. What happens, that there is the first phase, which is a insulin resistance, but after that, when they no longer compensate, decompensation of beta cells occur. So there is a beta cells burnt out phase. This condition is not treated, beta cells will have a burnt out phase. So what will happen? The insulin production will reduce. Decrease insulin synthesis. So this will have the first initial part as insulin resistance, and to compensate, initially beta cells will produce more insulin, but ultimately they will burn out. The beta cells will burn out, they will exhaust their capacity, and decrease insulin synthesis will occur. Now it is okay. Is it okay now? All right. So I will repeat it again. That due to the obesity, there is insulin resistance process which take place, and because of the insulin resistance, initially the beta cells will produce more insulin. And ultimately beta cell will enter into a burnt out stage, and in that stage there is a decreased insulin synthesis. So what exactly is the reason why ultimately the beta cells start less function? So there are two important pathogenesis for this beta cell burned out phase. So the first reason for this is a condition known as, these are the important terms, a condition known as glucose toxicity. That is chronic hyperglycemia will lead to the dysfunction of the beta cells. So glucose toxicity impair beta cell function. More glucose chronically will impair the function. And the second cause of beta cell dysfunction is lipotoxicity. Due to the free fatty acids and inflammatory markers. damaging pancreas, damaging the beta cells, damaging the beta cells. So these are the two conditions which are used. Glucose toxicity paradoxically hyperglycemia impair the beta cell functions, impair the beta cell function. Now second is lipotoxicity. Lipotoxicity is the accumulation of free fatty acids and inflammatory cytokines, and these damage the beta cells of the pancreas. They will damage the beta cells of the pancreas. So ultimately there will be decreased insulin synthesis, Now when the level of the insulin is reduced, so what will happen? Due to decreased insulin synthesis, there will be a gluconeogenesis and glycogenolysis increases, especially in the liver. So burned out phase means there is less production of the insulin. There is a less production of the insulin in this condition. Can insulin resistance occur in a lean person? Yes. Do not go by a lean person. Lean person can have a visceral fat which is not seen from outside, and that visceral fat will trigger this insulin resistance. So a lean person can have, so obesity means fat, visceral fat. Now so insulin synthesis will be reduced, and if insulin synthesis is reduced, yesterday we did this, that insulin normally inhibit the gluconeogenesis and glycogenolysis, so that will not be inhibited, the process will increase. As a result, there is a third pathogenesis, increase hepatic glucose production. There will be a increased hepatic glucose production. So these are the three important pathogenesis: insulin resistance, decreased insulin synthesis, and increased hepatic glucose production. They are working simultaneously to cause the elevated plasma glucose level. Which fat is involved, truncal or visceral? Truncal fat is almost synonym with the visceral fat, that is one and the same thing. So there will be increased gluconeogenesis and increased glycogenolysis because of decreased insulin action. So glucagon will work more because of the decreased insulin. Now coming to, so these are the pathogenesis of type 2 diabetes. Now coming to, in type 2 diabetes, high blood insulin, then why there is insulin resistance? No, it is the other way around. First there is a insulin resistance, and then insulin production increase, then the insulin production will increase, other way around. Post receptor mechanism of insulin. Post receptor signaling is going to the nucleus, and from the nucleus there is increased expression of GLUT4 receptor, which then go to the cell membrane, and then the glucose enters the cell. So that post receptor signal to the nucleus is impaired in inflammatory process. Is burnt out phase reversible? Remember this, you have done in the pathology, that if beta cells are destroyed, beta cells usually do not regenerate. Liver can regenerate, but beta cells usually do not regenerate. And when that value of 20% is reached, then it is a irreversible thing. Above 20%, there can be a reversal of high sugars. Mechanism of glucose toxicity is insulin resistance. Now coming to the now the management part, of the diabetes. So we have done the pathology of type 1 and type 2 diabetes. So more important aspect, as well as remember, this will be useful for you as a clinician also, not only for your exam but as a clinician, because most of you must have some known to some patient, family member suffering from diabetes. So it should be a accurate management of diabetes. So what is that accurate management of diabetes? Let's understand. So starting with the management of diabetes. Management of diabetes. So the management of diabetes, the most important point is, when the patient is coming to us, we will do some examination and we will do the lab test. So what is that protocol? That protocol is known as comprehensive diabetes evaluation. So the number one step here is a comprehensive diabetes evaluation. Comprehensive. And my advice is, you make a table in your paper or in your any card and give that card to your known tools or relatives, so that they can check how frequently they are going to the doctor, how frequently they are doing their investigations, and as well as the doctor. So number one is a physical examination. Physical examination. So the first visit, initial visit, follow up, and annual, and the annual. So physical examination, initial visit, follow up visit, and the annual. So the physical examination will consist of the checking of blood pressure. Essential. Blood pressure is essential. So it is done in every visit: initial visit, follow up visit, and the yearly. Follow up visit is usually 3 to 6 months. 3 to 6 months is the follow up visit. 6. Then the next component of the examination, it is, if a patient is complaining of postural dizziness, like this is a very common complaint, when patient stand up, there is a dizziness. So if indicated, if patient complained of postural dizziness, then you should do the orthostatic hypotension test. So BP check, orthostatic, that will be done, that is done. What is BP? BP is blood pressure. BP is blood pressure. So that should be checked. Physical examination, blood pressure should be checked at every visit. Now the third physical examination. So the first physical examination is blood pressure, and if patient complaining of postural dizziness, like suddenly standing there is a dizziness because of autonomic dysfunction, the blood pressure falls down. So orthostatic BP should be checked. In these patients. Now the third examination which is done is a very important examination, and that is a skin examination. Skin examination. So the skin examination is done, and mainly the points which are noted is in the skin examination any evidence of insulin resistance like acanthosis, and if patient is taking insulin site check. And this is one of the ignored component. Sometimes patient is taking insulin, still sugars are not controlled. Reason: patient has developed some lipodystrophies on the insulin site, so that will cause a decreased effectiveness of the insulin. So what you have to look for? You have to look for the lipodystrophy sites. Lipodystrophy sites, because insulin is anabolic hormone, so it will increase the local fat. So lipodystrophy is nothing but a accumulation of local fat, if a patient is complaining of the postural dizziness, and what is this orthostatic blood pressure check? That if after 3 minutes of standing from the supine position, if systolic BP decreases by 20 and or diastolic BP decreases by 10, this is the meaning of orthostatic hypotension. So patient will be supine and we will check the blood pressure, and then we will ask the patient to stand up, and during the standing position we will check the blood pressure again after 3 minutes, and the value of 20 degrees of systolic BP and 10 degrees of the diastolic BP indicative of postural hypotension, and that is suggestive of autonomic neuropathy. So there will be autonomic neuropathy, that is during standing BP suddenly falls. So the first test we do is the blood pressure, second is orthostatic blood pressure we will check, third is the skin examination, and in the skin examination we will check if there is marker of insulin resistance, acanthosis. So acanthosis is a marker of insulin resistance. Marker of insulin resistance, so that we can decide on the treatment. We will give those drugs which are insulin sensitizers. Now the next examination, a very important examination which has to be done, is the foot examination. And this is often ignored, but this diabetes worldwide is the most common cause of non-traumatic amputations in the world. Non-traumatic leg amputation, diabetes is the reason. So identify those signs which can lead to the diabetic foot ulcers. So foot examination, we will check for the pedal pulses, dorsalis pedis. We will examine, and in the foot we will do the vibration test. For the neuropathy, so in the foot examination we will check for a dorsalis pedis, can hypotension happen from squatting to standing position suddenly? It can happen. Alright, so the foot examination is done, and in the foot examination important components are the dorsalis pedis palpation, and a vibration test. Vibration sense is one of the early sense lost in diabetes. So vibration sense is one of the earliest sense to decrease with a tuning fork. So this foot examination is done at the initial visit and annually. A very important examination, and of course the fundus checkup, for diabetic retinopathy at the initial visit and once a year for diabetic retinopathy. So these are the examination points that clinical assessment of any diabetes patient, whether it is a type 1 diabetes or type 2 diabetes. These are essential components. And in the investigations of the diabetes, that is a lab investigations or lab tests. So this table, we are making an important table, that is first is the physical examination, and second is the lab investigations for comprehensive diabetes management. Why vibration test? Vibration test is a tuning fork test we place on the bony surface, and the vibration sense is assessed. Vibration sense is carried by the posterior column. All of you know from the physiology, the vibration sense. And nerve problem is there, and because of the neuropathy or because of the decreased blood flow, gangrene can occur in the legs. So that leads to the amputation. Now coming to the lab investigations. In the lab investigations, important are the HbA1c test that we will discuss in detail in the management of especially the type 2 diabetes or assessment. So this is done at initial visit, 3 months and annually. HbA1c test. HbA1c is a glycosylated hemoglobin test. Now the second test, important one, which we do is the urinary albumin creatinine ratio. Urine albumin creatinine ratio, UACR is the test, and that test is done as a spot test, and that detect the proteinuria, the albuminuria, very important complication of diabetes, nephropathy. So it detect early nephropathy. So this test detects early diabetes nephropathy. It detects the early diabetes nephropathy. Even before creatinine is elevated, this test will be abnormal. And how it is done? It is done at the initial visit and yearly. Urine albumin creatinine ratio for detecting the early diabetic nephropathy. Now, yes, CKD, it is a chronic kidney disease. Why dorsalis pedis? The dorsalis pedis is the artery, and if there is atherosclerosis, diabetes predisposed to the atherosclerosis, so there will be decreased blood supply, and when there is a decreased blood supply of the foot, what will happen? Gangrene will happen, and that lead to amputation and improper healing of the ulcerations. The normal value of the UACR, normal value is less than 30 milligram per gram of creatinine. This is a normal value of urinary albumin creatinine ratio, UACR, less than 30. Less than 30. No, orthostatic hypotension is only if patient is giving you the history. If patient is giving you the history. Now, coming to the next important test is the most common cause of death in diabetic patients is usually cardiovascular or kidney disease. These are the two important main cause of mortality in diabetes. Heart disease and kidneys. So for the heart, we will go for the lipid profile assessment. Lipid profile assessment, and lipid profile assessment is done at initial visit and yearly, and the yearly lipid profile assessment. And the most common lipid abnormality in diabetes is, I will give you the hint, increase free fatty acid. More free fatty acid, re-esterification. Re-esterification. So this re-esterification will lead to triglycerides. So the most common is increase triglycerides. Lipid abnormality. Now the other important test besides the HbA1c, lipid profile, we will go for the full kidney function test. Like serum creatinine. So why this kidney function tests are done? There are some drugs which should be reduced. The dose of those drugs should be reduced if creatinine is increased, and some drugs are contraindicated if creatinine is high. So kidney function test, we will go for a serum creatinine, and we will also assess with the help of kidney function test estimated GFR. Why this test is run? First, to know the complication of the nephropathy, and second is to decide on the drugs, which drug we will choose. We do not start the medicines blindly in a patient of diabetes. We will first assess these tests. Now the other important test which is done is, of course, some medicines are excreted by the liver. So liver function test. To assess for in diabetes, there is a fat deposit in the liver. There is a fat deposit in the liver known as non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. As well as to assess for the anti-diabetes medicines. To be given, and that we will discuss in the treatment section, ki which drug should be avoided in liver disease, which drug should be avoided in the kidney disease. Why there is a rise in the serum creatinine? There is a rise in the serum creatinine because of diabetic nephropathy. Creatinine is increased, and with that high creatinine, then we have some drugs which should be avoided, or the dose of those drugs should be reduced. And if a patient is taking the metformin for a long time, then we will go for, if chronic metformin use, if there is a chronic metformin use, we will do that test. If patient is coming that Dr. Saab, I am taking the metformin for the last 5 years, 10 years. So if there is a chronic metformin use, it has been seen that metformin decreases B12 absorption from the GIT. So we will go for a serum vitamin B12 levels, as metformin decreases B12 absorption from the GIT. So this is a very important, because metformin is the most commonly used drugs in diabetes, and B12 levels, if they reduce, they can cause anemia, they can cause neuropathy, they can cause brain changes. So these are the essential tests to be done in a patient, any patient, diabetic patient coming to you for evaluation. Now come to the which are the pharmacological therapies available with us for management of type 1 and type 2 diabetes individually. So come to the, so this is the initial assessment of a patient coming to you. Now come to the treatment, pharmacological treatment of, starting with type 1 diabetes. Treatment of type 1 diabetes. Okay, so if the patient is not able to afford, then do not go for those tests, but we can counsel the patient that these tests are important for the proper management of the diabetes. So the full table. This is a full table. Can a patient having diabetes and hypertension can have a postural dizziness? Very good question. If a patient of diabetes is also hypertensive, can there be a postural hypotension? Yes, definitely. There can be a postural hypotension. Meaning of postural hypotension, remember, postural hypotension is a temporary phase. That patient, when from supine suddenly stand, there is a fall in the blood pressure. That can happen. That can happen. And in the pharma, you also have must have studied that alpha blockers. When you give the first dose of the alpha blocker, suddenly patient will have a postural dizziness, even if patient is having hypertension. Glycomet is metformin. Remember, glycomet is metformin, so that reduces the B12 absorption. These are, remember, these are all practical questions. And if you look at last 3 years exam, especially of AIIMS, they give at least one question on diabetes patient, a clinical actual patient coming to their OPD. So they all follow these guidelines. So because diabetes, India has a high burden, in your exam they ask the high burden diseases. They will ask the high burden diseases, and also this is important for you as a clinician also. So second was the lab test, and lab test was HbA1c, urine albumin creatinine ratio, lipid profile test, kidney function test, liver function test, and if chronic metformin use, B12 levels are indicated. All right, so we will take a break here for streaming purpose. We'll take a short break, and then we'll discuss the management options for type 1 and type 2 diabetes. LFT changes will be, liver function test will be high because of non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. They will be high. Where to check for the acanthosis? At the back of the neck, there is a dark line. Back of the neck, back of the elbow here. pigmentation, a thick skin with the pigmentation, that is also a acanthosis nigrans. So you can check if there is some obese individual, then you are more likely to get these changes, so that you can decide that you will give some insulin sensitizer drugs in those patients. How GFR is calculated? The GFR is calculated by a formula, and that formula is known as Galt formula, age minus 140 minus age into weight divided by serum creatinine into 72. This is known as eGFR. eGFR is estimated GFR, and this include the age, weight, and the creatinine values of the patient. So that has to be estimated in every patient of diabetes. Okay, so we will do those complication. Diabetic nephropathy we will do neuropathy in subsequent classes. So we'll take 2 minutes of streaming break. All right, so coming to the treatment of type 1 diabetes, the mainstay of treatment is the insulin therapy. Because insulin deficiency is there, so let's understand some concepts of this insulin treatment, regimes of the insulin, how we give that and how to manage such patients. So type 1 diabetes, there can be treatment options. Number 1, it is insulin therapy. Number 2, it is analog of a peptide which is also released from the pancreas, and that peptide is amylin analog, and this is known as pramlintide. So we'll discuss 1 or 2 points here in the treatment. And the third treatment is the pancreas islet cell transplant. So there are 3 treatment options for type 1 diabetes. First is, and the mainstay is the insulin. Second is the amylin analogs, and third is pancreatic islet cell transplantation. So our main focus will be on the insulin treatment. So come to the number 1 treatment, and that is insulin. So in the insulin, the basic point is, first we have to calculate a total dose of insulin. Total dose of the insulin we have to calculate, and that formula is total dose. (0.4 to 1 units per kg per day. So 0.4 to 1 units per kg per day is the total dose of the insulin that we start with. So there will be then it is divided into, the total dose will be divided into 2 types of insulin. We will give basal insulin are which work for a longer duration of time. for a longer duration of time. And of the total dose, the 50% dose is a basal insulin. While the bolus insulin, it is 50% of total dose. Bolus is the short acting insulin. They control the postprandial sugars. They control the postprandial sugar, and basal insulin usually control the fasting sugars. They control the fasting sugars. So so we have just started with the treatment of type 1 diabetes. So I have just given the treatment options for type 1 diabetes: insulin, amylin analog, and pancreatic islet cell transplantation. These are the 3 treatment options, but the mainstay is the insulin. So the insulin dose is calculated with this formula: 0.4 to 1 units per kg, and they are divided into basal insulin and the bolus insulins. So the basal insulins, basically they controls fasting sugars, and they control postprandial sugars. They control the postprandial sugars. What is the meaning of a bolus? Bolus is a short acting insulin. Bolus is a short acting insulin. Basal is long acting. Long acting insulin. Now the examples and the graph. How to manage these patients, which glucose value is fluctuating, how to control that, practical aspect of managing these patients. But first we should sensitize ourselves for the name of the insulin, because in the exam patient is taking glargine. So you should be knowing what is glargine. Glargine is a basal or a bolus insulin type of things. So the basal insulin examples are example: glargine, detimir, difference between bolus and stat. These are the technical terms used. These are the technical terms which are used. Then degludec. These are almost 24-hour working, almost 24-hour working, while NPH insulin is not 24-hour. It works for 12 hours, and these are almost 24 hours. Glargine, detimir, degludec. Now the bolus insulins, that is a short acting insulin. Short acting insulin are Lispro, then Aspart, then these are the very, you can say, ultra short acting insulin. Ultra short acting insulin means they work for 2 to 4 hours. They work for 2 to 4 hours, and they can be taken just before the meals. There is no need to give a gap of half an hour before the meal. They can be taken just before the meals, because they are very fast acting and short acting insulins. Short acting insulins. Now the regular insulin, they usually work longer. They will work for 6 hours. Regular insulins. Now, yes, the Lentus is Glargine, trade name. Detimir is Levimir, because in the prescription you find the trade names. Deglutec, Tresiba. So these are the long acting insulin, but in the exam you will be given the names like Glargine, Detimir and Deglutec and the Deglutec. Now, how to sustain release insulin? Actrapid. Actrapid is a regular insulin. Actrapid is a regular insulin. Lispro, Humalog, Aspart, Novorapid, Glucosamine is Epidra. So these are the trade names. These are the trade names. Now, with this information in mind, ki how to start the patient total dose, then divide that total dose into 50-50 of basal and 50% of the bolus, 50% of the bolus dose. So how they will be able to control the sugar values. So let's understand how they control and what will be the clinical questions given to you. Clinical questions given to you. Onset of action. The onset of action for these insulins, short acting insulins, onset of action is 15 minutes for short acting insulin, for the short acting insulin. While long acting insulin, it is usually few hours. It is usually few hours. So for short acting insulin. Mixtard, actually Mixtard is a combination of short acting and the long acting insulin. Short acting combined with NPH. So these are the combinations. These are the combinations. Total dose is 0.4 to 1, or there is a formula. There is a rough formula, but most of the guidelines says start with 0.4 to 1, and as a practical point, what we do, if the sugar level of patient is, for example, sugar level of patient is average sugar 300, so we take first two digits and start with that dose. Like if it is a 300 sugar values, we start with 30 units total dose. If the sugar value is 400, we start with 40 units. If sugar is average 200, we start with the 20 units. So that is a rough estimate. That is a rough estimate to start with the dose. Now, very important graph of this insulins is, and this graph will give you the assessment how to manage the sugar, which insulin has to be adjusted. So this is the graph. Here is the time period. Here is the time period. So the basal insulin is usually given at bedtime. Basic principle is the basal insulins bedtime. So bedtime means I will call it as HS here. HS. Then this is the time period morning. This is afternoon, evening, and HS. So this is the time period, bedtime, HS, morning, afternoon, evening. So we gave the basal insulin at the bedtime. So the basal insulin is given here at bedtime. It maintain a steady level. It does not show very high peaks. It does not show very high peaks. So this is a basal insulin, and it will work for almost 24 hours till the next bedtime. Basal insulin. HS means bedtime. HS is bedtime. So this is the basal insulin, and basal insulin cover almost a flat level of the insulin levels, and it will control. Now the postprandial sugars or the bolus doses, they are given with breakfast time. So they are given here. They are given with the meals. Given with the meals. So these are bolus insulin. They are the bolus insulins which are given short acting insulin. Now what these bolus insulin do, they mainly control postprandial of that meal, as well as they control the preprandial of next meal. Bolus insulins. So they control the postprandial of the particular meal where it is given. Postprandial is 2 hours. It is usually 2 hours, as well as the preprandial of next meal. Preprandial of the next meal. And basal insulins, they usually control the fasting levels. Now coming to why basal insulin does not control the PPG, because they have a steady level of concentration, and when meal is taken there is a spike of the glucose level in the body. So that spike will be controlled by a short acting insulin. Preprandial means just before the meal. Now both types can be used together in the meals. Preprandial is before the meal, before the next meal, like before lunch sugars, before lunch or before dinner sugars. Both types can be used in the patient in type 1 diabetes. Remember, in type 1 diabetes we usually prefer this regime. This is a basal bolus regime, most preferred regime, because it gives the flexibility. So this is known as the basal bolus regime of the insulin. Bolus given before meals, yes, bolus is given. That means person should be taking 4 insulin. Yes, patient will be taking, or child will be taking 4 time insulin. Now coming to the question, how insulin increase before the meal? No, insulin will not before the meal. That will control the blood sugar levels. Okay, so now tell me, why is basal insulin needed? To provide a steady state level of the insulin throughout the 24 hours, and especially for controlling the fasting sugars. Now coming to the question, my question is, if a type 1 diabetes patient comes to you If a type 1 diabetes patient come to you and the regime is given to you, this is a clinical case. Patient is taking Dubludac, patient is taking Lispro 3 times and Dubludac at bedtime. Doses will be mentioned. So this is the graph which will be there. Patient is taking according to this chart. Now listen to the question carefully. Which insulin dose will you increase? So patient is taking this regime. This is the regime of the patient. So my question to you is, which insulin dose to be increased if pre-lunch glucose is high? So other sugar levels are normal. Patient is checking the sugar levels. All sugars are normal. So which insulin you will increase? You will increase if pre-lunch glucose are high and other values are okay, and other sugar readings are normal. So which one? Bolus. Bolus of which time? Bolus of which time? Afternoon time, evening time, or morning time? Which dose of bolus will you increase if the pre-lunch glucose values are high? Pre-lunch glucose values are high. So answer here is the insulin which will be increased is morning bolus dose. Morning bolus dose should be increased because the morning bolus dose is controlling the pre-lunch values. And similarly, if pre-dinner values are high, you increase the afternoon dose of bolus. So this is the best regime of the patient. And with this regime, the patient has to check the blood sugar levels multiple times. So this regime is known as Bayes self sugar check at least 6 times a day needed before and after each meal. With this regime. Why pre-lunch glucose is increasing? Pre-lunch glucose is increasing maybe multiple factors. First reason is the morning dose was inadequate for that patient. So you have to increase that dose. Also patient is taking some snacks, high calorie snacks between breakfast and lunch, so that can cause a high pre-lunch sugars. So it depends on multiple factors. What if pre-breakfast glucose levels are high? If pre-breakfast glucose levels are high, then you increase the night dose, HS dose of the basal insulin. Basal insulin control the fasting values. So that has to be increased. Now coming to the sometime what can happen. So this is an important question which you have asked. What if the fasting values are increased, fasting values are high? So there are two important phenomena which can occur, especially in the patients who are taking multiple insulin and bedtime insulin. There are the two phenomena which can occur here. So first is this is a clinical case. If fasting glucose is high. Clinical case, fasting glucose is high. So there is two important phenomena which can occur. The first phenomena is that night dose of insulin is high. Night dose of the insulin is high for that patient. We have prescribed, but that was high. As a result, there will be hypoglycemia, especially around 3 a.m. That time period can vary plus minus 1 hour here and there, but why 3 a.m.? Think practically. Patient has taken the food, dinner patient has taken, so that food will take care of the sugars for around 3 to 4 hours. After that, patient is sleeping, patient is not taking anything. So as a result, what will happen? Sugar will go down. If the night dose of the insulin is high, patient is not taking food at night time when sleeping, so hypoglycemia will take place. And now because of the hypoglycemia, what happens? There is compensatory increase of stress hormone to preserve the glucose. So these compensatory increase is catecholamines. This compensatory increase is glucagon. There can be corticosteroids. To maintain glucose. Compensatory increase. And sometimes this compensatory increase leads to very high sugars. So the release is so much that it exceed the normal values. So this will lead to high glucose in morning, in the early morning. So the fasting glucose will be high. So this phenomena is known as the so much insulin So this phenomena is because of high insulin dose, so much insulin, so much. That means Moyogi phenomena. This is known as the Somogyi phenomena. So in the Somogyi effect or Somogyi phenomena, there is a hypoglycemia followed by hyperglycemia. So what you need to do, you need to decrease the night dose of the insulin. You need to decrease the night dose of the insulin. So treatment is of Somogyi phenomena, decrease night dose of insulin. So therefore do not just go by the fasting values and start increasing the nighttime dose. No, ask the patient to check the sugar, alarm clock. patient will put a alarm clock of 3 a.m. and ask the patient to check the sugar levels at that time before taking a decision on nighttime insulin. So this is one of the mistake done. Like we see a fasting value is elevated, we start increasing the nighttime dose. But if it is a Somogyi phenomena, it will create more problems. Now the other phenomena is, so this is a Somogyi phenomena. The other phenomena is if there is night dose of insulin is low, night dose of the insulin patient is taking low. So what will happen, there is a normal physiological phenomena that around 4 o'clock, around 4 to 5, there is a physiological increase, surge of growth hormone, So in the Somogyi, what will happen in the rest of the day? It is not affecting the rest of the day. So physiological increase, surge of growth hormone will be there, as well as the cortisols at around 4 to 5 a.m. and that will lead to increase glucose in the morning. So even in a healthy individual, remember, even in a healthy individual, growth hormone and the cortisol are released at that time, and they can cause a slight elevation even in a normal individual, but these are diabetic patients, so that effect will lead to a high fasting sugars. So this phenomena, this is because of low dose of insulin. So this phenomena is known as due to decreased dose of insulin. D. This phenomena is known as dawn phenomena. And what is the treatment? The treatment of this condition is increase the night dose of insulin. Increase the night dose of insulin. Hypoglycemia, that we will be coming later on. Hypoglycemia usually stimulate the sympathetic activity. There will be tremors, sweating. So these will be the symptoms of the hypoglycemia, fasting hypoglycemia. Why pre-lunch is not fasting? As I told you, fasting means at least 8 hours of no calorie intake. So that is the term reserved for the morning values, fasting values, 8 hours of no calorie intake. Is this for type 1 diabetes? No. This phenomena can occur in type 2 diabetes if the patient is taking insulin. So this can be seen in both the condition, type 1 and type 2 diabetes, Somogyi phenomena and the dawn phenomena. And how you will look for the dawn phenomena? Again, tell the patient to check the sugars at 3 a.m. If the patient sugars are normal or high at 3 a.m., that means it is a dawn phenomena. So the timing is same, 3 a.m. If sugars are low, Somogyi. If sugars are normal or high, it is a dawn phenomena. Now, coming to, this was the concept of the giving the insulin, and what all problems can be faced and how to solve those problems in a patient of type 1 diabetes. Now, coming to the next treatment, before the treatment of amylin, practical thing, and that practical thing is, think practically. Type 1 diabetes is seen in children, and child will take sweets, child will take cake, will go to the birthday party, will take the cake. What will you do? So will you ask the child to stop eating cake? If you say no, child will not stop eating cake. So what you have to do as a physician, as a clinician, do not force these children कि they should reduce their intake. They will not. They will become very agitated. So in that scenario, there is a very simple formula, and that simple formula is increase 1 unit of bolus insulin for every 10 gram increase of glucose intake. So for every 10 gram or increase of the glucose intake, whatever patient is taking, that will be considered as a carbohydrate or a glucose. For every 10 gram, 1 unit will neutralize that effect. Of the bolus insulin. Now coming to the second treatment option, that we have seen above, and that is the only other treatment besides insulin approved for type 1 diabetes. Remember, in type 1 diabetes there is no other medicine approved, only amylin analog is approved. So come to the number 2, that is the treatment option of amylin analog. What about the complex carbohydrate? They will not cause immediate surge of the glucose. So continue with the same thing, because if glucose is slowly absorbed, that will not impact the postprandial sugars so much. Now coming to the amylin analog, and this is the only other pharmacotherapy indicated in type 1 diabetes after insulin. So this drug is given, and the mechanism of this drug is, this has 2 actions. This inhibit the glucagon. And secondly, it also causes a decrease gastric emptying. It causes a decreased gastric emptying. So we know the mechanism of the glucagon is easy. That is the glucagon is insulin antagonist. It is insulin antagonist. So we are inhibiting the antagonist. And decreased gastric emptying. How does it help? It help in early satiety. Patient will feel more fullness. So patient will take less food. So decreased gastric emptying causes early satiety. The dose of the amylin analog, this is given as subcutaneous. starting dose 15 micrograms before each meal. So this is injectable. This is injectable agent, subcutaneous, 15 micrograms before each meal. Before each meal. How to differentiate a Somogy and the Dawn phenomena? I have told you. Ask the patient to check the blood sugar level at 3 a.m. If the sugar levels are low, Somogy phenomena. If sugar levels are normal or high, it is a Dawn phenomena. It will be a Dawn phenomena. Now coming to can enhance insulin secretion by the sulfonylurea? No, because pancreas does not have beta cells. So if you give sulfonylureas, it will not affect. It will not affect. Now the third one, the third treatment option for type 1 diabetes is pancreas islet cell transplantation. So that can be treatment options, especially in the end stages. But remember, patient will be taking the immunosuppressive agents. So patient this is 15 microgram dose. Dose is micrograms. It is the starting dose. It is the starting dose subcutaneously before each meal. Before each meal. Now the pancreatic islet cell transplantation. Pancreatic islet cell transplantation. So this will be, patient will be on the immunosuppressive agents. Patient will be on the immunosuppressive agent. Therefore, now the this treatment option is reserved. This treatment option is reserved when patient has end stage renal disease and patient kidney transplantation is being done. So the indication nowadays for pancreatic islet cell transplantation is nowadays is done along with renal transplant. Because in a renal transplant, patient will also be taking the immunosuppressive agents. So therefore this treatment option approved is when patient is undergoing renal transplantation for end stage renal disease. Not alone. It has been seen that the results are not good because patient will be taking the immunosuppressive agent, and those are causing the infection chances and other complications of immunosuppressive. So pancreatic islet cell transplantation. So diabetic nephropathy is an indication for beta cell transplantation. If patient is undergoing a renal transplantation and patient sugars are not still controlled, then you can go for a pancreatic islet cell transplantation. Yes, you can go for that. Now these are the treatment options for the type 1 diabetes, and with that we finish with the class for today. And one more practical aspect, and that practical aspect is was asked in the AIIMS exam, and let me check your knowledge. So this is a quiz form. It is related to your practical aspects, so no need to write, just tell me the answer. So my first question, listen to my first question. Insulin, which is the best site in the body for insulin administration? No, for a routine management subcutaneous site is there. So my first question is, what is the best site for insulin administration? Abdomen, arms, thighs or buttocks? Which is the best site? Which is the best site? Yes, it is abdomen. It is abdomen. Now my second question, yes, is this was the question was asked, I think, in last year AIMS exam, ki where will you not give the insulin? Where will you not give the insulin? Now my second question to you, let me check. My second question to you is, while taking the insulin from the fridge, patient should take the insulin immediately or after 30 minutes? Second question, after taking the insulin from the fridge, patient will take the insulin after 5 minutes or after 30 minutes? What is the time between after taking the insulin from the fridge? Answer, 30 minutes, because freeze insulin will be cold, and insulin at cold temperature, when you inject in the patient, it will not work that well. Insulin work when it is at a physiological body temperature. Physiological body temperature. So remember, tell the patient to keep the insulin for at least half an hour outside, then take this insulin, then take this insulin. So these are some very important practical points for the insulin. So with this we will finish with the class for today, and tomorrow we will do the management of type 2 diabetes and the complications of diabetes we will start. And my advice to you is read the pharmacology, especially of the oral anti-diabetic agents. Come prepared with the pharmacology so that you will be able to understand those mechanism of action and in which patients which drug should be used.